Our second company this evening is AIM-listed ValiRX, who are looking to become a contract research organization or CRO specializing in cancer and women's health drugs. What's interesting about them is their letter of intent to license VAL-201 was signed in early November with TheoremRx, and VAL-201, for those who don't know, is a short peptide being studied as a potential treatment for prostate cancer. The potential value of the deal would be in excess of $61 million US, plus royalties for the first cancer indication, with a further $37.5 million for each later indication. And I've done the reading, and that's not out of the realms of possibility. Suzanne Dilly is CEO at ValiRx, and she's with us tonight. And welcome, Suzy.
Thank you, Donald. Good evening. Good evening to the audience as well. First of all, I'm sure everybody presenting here tonight will present something very similar as the first slide, but this is just the disclaimer to say that clearly we believe that what we have in ValiRx is very valuable, and we would love to have more of the audience as shareholders, if you're not all already anyway, which of course I hope you are. But this is just a reminder that please do your own research. Don't rely solely on the contents of this presentation in order to make a decision about whether to invest in ValiRx. So with those pleasantries aside, I'd like to introduce you to the overall strategy of the company. So I'm very appreciative of Donald for that introduction and introducing us as a new strategy of wanting to be a service providing company, a CRO, as he defined. And we'd like to take a step back to have a broader overview of the company strategy to start off with. So what we do in ValiRx is we identify programs at a very early stage of the drug development pathway. And we take these typically from universities, but they can also be from charity funded research or from other biotech companies. And we take these programs, these are therapeutic development programs, usually small molecules or synthetic peptides in the areas of oncology or women's health. And we take these programs from the stage of lead optimization, where a drug candidate has just been proposed and is looking promising for development towards clinical trials. And we carry out the preclinical development stage of work. So this is all the regulatory required studies that prove the safety of the drug and provide confidence before the drug candidate enters clinical trials that it has a good risk-benefit profile before it enters the first human testing. So this stage of preclinical testing is quite challenging for those entities such as universities who carry out the early discovery to do, because it's usually that stage where it's a little bit more expensive. The labs have to be run to a particular standard, and perhaps those experiments aren't quite as interesting as the experiments that the academics would like to run, which are typically really quite imaginative experiments with all the bells and whistles and absolutely the top newest innovative technologies that they're developing in the university. So we'd like to take the program at that stage and really build a corporate framework around the program so that we take it through to the stage where it's clinic ready, that is ready to enter clinical trials, but also partnership ready. So by encouraging the academic innovators to develop alongside the project, we can have a strong team, but also a strong corporate framework by ValiRx providing that experience of setting up companies and of building everything that a company needs behind it before it enters clinical trials. At that stage, we then look for third-party funding or for a third-party partner, perhaps a larger pharma partner or a larger biotech partner, in order to fund the clinical development. Now, this is a bit of a deviation to our strategy from a few years ago. So ValiRx, a few years ago, used to take programs through to the end of phase 2 clinical trials in order to hit that value inflection point where you have the clinical proof of concept and real confidence that the product's going to work before looking to pass on to a larger pharma partner or another biotech partner. Well, we've decided it's more important to focus on the preclinical section of work so that we can de-risk the programs, we can carry out all of that science that's needed to make those programs clinic ready, but without having the larger expenditure of the clinical trials. So we believe that this creates for our investors a pipeline of programs that will be faster moving, will be less expensive to run and will provide news flow on a more regular basis when we've got it up and running. So when we consider this strategy, clearly we're not the only people who are identifying good science in universities. So what really makes ValiRx unique? And we believe that the really unique point of ValiRx is our ability to draw 3 separate strands together and to integrate that in a way that makes our translation service, if we call it that, really a unique prospect. We have the science expertise in the company because we have taken programs through clinical trials in the past. We have that experience to develop preclinical programs with the end point in mind. So we have that edge over people who are just specializing in preclinical, as they have done all the time. But as an AIM-listed company, we also have a fairly unique blend of commercial and financial expertise so that we can introduce those programs while we're building that corporate framework around the program. We'll be placing them into special purpose vehicles, subsidiaries of ValiRx, which will be able to go out and talk to third-party financiers, whether that's venture capital or whether that's the larger pharma partners to look for partnership arrangements for funding clinical trials. We can support that because we know what those larger partners need and what they want to see in a product. And we also have that commercial experience of negotiating deals. And I think that that's exactly what we've demonstrated recently with our ValiRx program. But I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail in a minute. So looking a little bit more about the drug development pathway and why it's so important to have specialists in each stage of that process. So what we've displayed here on this slide is we have the 1 to 20 representing the 20 years that a patent is in force for after application. So as soon as you file a patent, whether or not it's going to be granted or not, the 20-year clock starts. And at the end of 20 years, the patent is no longer in force, which means that all of the information that you've published and all of the information that has to be placed into the patent is available to the wider world to use, to copy, and to produce competing products for. So you really have quite a strict 20-year timeline on this to develop the drugs and to sell them in order to make that profit at the end of the process. And you can see here that even when you're looking at really quite an efficient timescale, and these are timescales for preclinical phase 1, 2, 3 and market authorization, it's taken directly off the FDA website for their guidelines of how long it should take. But even using these really quite optimistic timelines, you still only have 7 years at the end of the patent life in order to make sales and to make that commercial return on the product. So it's really important to make sure that each player in this pathway does what they do in the most efficient way possible. And we believe that the best way to do that is to be highly specialized. So you can see here that ValiRx is specializing in the preclinical arena, as I described earlier, and that we have these overlaps with the other parties who are taking part here. So we have the universities here carrying out the early discovery and hopefully being able to pass on their good programs to ValiRx, where we can develop them through the preclinical pathway to make them appropriate for adoption into either larger biotechs or to big pharma. Now we note here we've made a fairly tentative link to big pharma here. Typically the larger pharmaceutical companies will take programs from phase 2 or later when you've got that first proof of concept in clinical testing. However, in some areas, and particularly in areas such as women's health, where there's really quite a scarcity of programs around the preclinical arena at the moment, big pharma are starting to stretch back earlier, and they're certainly talking about taking programs a lot earlier than they have done in the past. But we also detail the other players here that also operate in this space. So the mid-sized biotech and SPVs that we put here, this is to detail the mid-sized biotechs, typically are family office run biotechs. There's quite a few around Europe that aren't household names, but really are quite significant companies that take programs from late preclinical. And although we've highlighted here that they quite often take them to phase 2, sometimes they actually take them a lot further than that as well. But the SPVs that we've highlighted in this box, we've particularly stressed here because this is the type of company that we've licensed or that we've signed the letter of intent to sublicense VAL201 to. So this is a special purpose vehicle that's been set up. In our case, TheoremRx is being set up by a group of industry experts in order to take a small pipeline of programs, of which we believe ValiRx will be really the centerpiece of their work, and to take those through into some important stages of clinical development to, in the case of ValiRx, to enhance the clinical data that we've already developed and in order to move it forwards. So this is becoming more common. The group of industry experts, particularly in the US, get together, and these may be ex-pharma people. They may be, in our case, we named Ken Sorensen on our RNS release about TheoremRx. He's a patent agent, or used to work in the USPTO. And it's people like that who have the expertise to take programs forwards, who can get together and raise money around a particular product or particular group of products that they believe will sit well together and will make them attractive and make the products attractive to larger pharma companies a few years down the line. The other type of entity we've highlighted here is biotech platforms. So this is to highlight the fact that there are some companies who have interesting platform technologies, who sometimes offer these platforms to the wider industry as services, while also developing their own in-house pipeline. Now, this will be an in-house pipeline that uses their platform technology and will quite often generate quite a few hits from that. There's those drug candidates that fall into our sphere of interest, and that's another source of programs for us, that we can potentially take programs where they've been generated by a platform and perhaps that biotech doesn't have the resources to take forwards everything that they generate. But as you can see on the biotech platform box, that actually overhangs in both directions to our area of expertise. So in some cases, we might actually be passing programs on to them as well as taking them off. So I hope that this diagram really gives an overview of exactly where we sit, how we sit amongst the other types of companies, and why we think it's really important to specialize in this area. Now, while we're looking at this, we want to also consider how we can better enhance our expertise in this very specific area of preclinical development. And we think that the next stage for ValiRx is to look at expanding our capability by actually looking for platform technologies or facilities or capabilities that would enhance our ability to carry out those preclinical tasks, but actually to carry it out in-house and not necessarily to outsource everything as we do at the moment. So although it's very typical for a biotech such as ValiRx to be virtual, to not necessarily have our own labs that do everything, but to send a lot of work out to third-party labs, because this avoids us needing to finance all of the equipment we need, actually having a basic capability that will allow us to do some of the work in-house could actually create some rather interesting opportunities for us. So that's what we're looking into doing now. We're looking at where we can expand our capability and expand our ability to carry out that preclinical research by bringing in-house some interesting facilities or technologies that would enable us to do that. And again, just as before, where I asked what makes ValiRx unique, we have to ask why now? Why do we believe that now is the time to start bringing this together? And we believe that the answer to that is data. So there's a lot of new platform technologies out there at the moment that are generating a lot of data. You only have to look at the frequency and the ease of genomic sequencing, for example, over the last few years to know that the amount of data that's generated now at affordable prices is huge compared to where it was 20 years ago. But that comes with its own problems as well as its being a solution of its own, because we can generate a lot of data, but what do we do with the data when it's generated? And this is where I'm probably going to get slapped over the wrist here by our chairman, Kevin Cox, for using the word AI, but it's the word that I always end up using when I'm considering this. But the use of AI, the use of algorithms, the use of better technologies to handle that data, to process that data so that it becomes a lot easier now to handle huge data sets and to extract interesting things out of that data set. But actually there's a third step to this as well, and that's the data application picture on this slide, that it's all very well generating data and understanding what that means, but you have to be able to implement it as well. Otherwise, you're just generating data for data's sake, which is great for academic publications, but less useful if you don't actually apply what you've learned to planning your clinical trial better, or perhaps de-risking that drug pipeline. And what we want to be able to do is we want to identify lab capabilities that will enable us to generate data, analyze that data, and then understand how that data can better consider the drug candidates in our pipeline to make sure that we understand the biology to the best extent that we can, and that will enable us to move those drug candidates into the right diseases. So, for example, I've spoken about women's health conditions a lot in the past, and we believe that there's a lot of drug candidates in development already for other diseases that could very easily be directed towards diseases of women's health. But actually, early stage drug development workers quite often don't push it in that direction, because the extra toxicology studies that you have to do before you can enter clinical trials in women, particularly of women of childbearing potential, so women anywhere between 20 and 50, is really difficult to get those women into early stage clinical trials unless you have a more robust preclinical data package. And knowing that you have the confidence to spend that extra resource in developing that package is something that we believe we can support by better data generation, better data understanding, and making sure that translates into thorough biological understanding of all of our programs. So that's where we want to be. That's what we believe we can create. And I think I've probably already covered most of our strategic ambition in those past couple of slides, but we want to aim everything that we're doing and everything that I've talked about, how we're going to do, towards making good drug candidates in women's health and oncology. Now, because we have a lot of oncology experience and some women's health experience, at the moment, we anticipate that a lot of the women's health work is going to be women's health oncology and the gynecological cancers in particular, but also we've recently taken in a program under evaluation in triple-negative breast cancer. So we're looking to develop programs in that area. And we believe that by building our capabilities to generate that data and understand the biology better, that we can do that. And when we're talking about women's health, we're not just talking about those diseases that are traditionally associated with women's health. Of course, our endometriosis program is absolutely central to our work and is an important part of our pipeline, but also diseases such as lupus, which is predominantly affecting women, but other diseases as well that are just less well served for women. So diseases where the treatments are available for everyone, but actually work better in men, or perhaps the doses need changing for women, and that there just needs to be more considerable thought into making sure that the data understands that both women and men need drugs developing for them. So very briefly, because I appreciate I'm running out of time here, looking at the pipeline as it stands at the moment, I think for the next time we do a presentation, I'm actually going to flip this slide round, because the most important part of our pipeline as it stands here, or one of the most important parts, is the triple-negative breast cancer program under evaluation. So we announced this a month or so ago, that we've taken this program under an evaluation agreement from a London university. Unfortunately, we can't say much more about it at the moment, but that's currently undergoing some preclinical assays, as it will for the next around 9 months, probably, while we assess whether it's scientifically and commercially relevant to take into a full licensing agreement for us, so that we can run it properly through all of the preclinical development stages that are needed to make it clinic ready and partnership ready. And this is where the future lies in this pipeline. It's those programs that we're bringing in new, initially under evaluation agreement, and we hope there'll be a few more of those in the coming months as we continue to talk to universities and to continue to negotiate these agreements with them. But then also, importantly on this pipeline agreement, you have VAL301, our program for endometriosis, which is our flagship women's health program. Now, this is still in preclinical development, and it is under evaluation by a Japanese pharma who are carrying out their own preclinical work as well, in order to consider whether or not they would like to further develop it with us. But even while that's ongoing, we're also carrying out our own work on this programme to ensure that it can now move forwards at an efficient rate to make this clinic ready, so that it can look for a partner to take it forwards into clinical trials. And then finally, also on this, we have VAL201 and VAL401, which are the programmes which we define as our legacy assets. So these are programmes that have been in clinical trials and that we are actively looking to out-license. So VAL201, clearly we can't be too active at the moment because that is now under an exclusivity agreement with TheoremRx under the letter of intent that was signed last month. And we're, as we announced in that announcement about the letter of intent, we're hoping that the first payments from TheoremRx will arrive before the end of the year. As far as we're aware, that's still all on track and ongoing. But as we announced that timeline in the RNS, clearly we will have to update all of our investors if that changes. Clearly, we're not expecting that to change, but if it does, we will let you know and let you know what the new timelines are. If it is extended, we wouldn't expect it to be extended by very much. So I think that gives you a very brief overview of ValiRx, and I'll leave you here with the contact slide. Obviously, we have an opportunity for questions and answers now, although perhaps a little shorter than Donald intended because I've spoken a bit too much there. But please feel free to email any of us if you have any questions that aren't answered today. Thank you.
Okay, Suzy, thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. Well done. Let's do TheoremRx again, because it is very, very important to you guys. I presume in the history of ValiRx, you haven't ever got anything to such a large amount of money stage.
Well, it's absolutely crucial for us. And I haven't been I've been on the board of ValiRx for nearly 18 months now, but clearly I was involved in ValiRx before that as part of the ValiSeek subsidiary. So to the best of my knowledge, this is the biggest thing that's ever happened to ValiRx. VAL201 was the flagship programme for a very long time. The majority of resources over the last 10 years at ValiRx have been directed towards VAL201. So to now be able to be in a position where we can monetize that, we can bring cash back into the company in order to spend on our new programs and to really start turning that over. It's fantastic. But best of all, it shows a validation of our strategy, that we can develop projects to a point where they are of interest to people, that we can make those negotiations, we can make those commercial agreements. And with a group such as TheoremRx, which are one of these, as I spoke about earlier, one of these special purpose vehicles that's been set up specifically to run VAL201 in a small pipeline of programs, it's really exciting. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with it over the next few years. So
you have a lot of faith in TheoremRx?
Absolutely. We've been working really closely with them for most of this year. And certainly that's intensified even more over the last few weeks. As we've really got to grips with exactly what they need on science and exactly what they're going to do next. So we've been starting to line things up for them and helping them with looking at exactly how it's going to work when they start their clinical trials.
Now, Mike, could we go back to slide number 8, please? Oh, you're a star. Thank you, Mike. When you get that money in from TheoremRx, let's be positive and say it's going to happen at some point. Where will that money get spent, and how much money do you get initially, and where will it be spent? And it will be spent on any of these programs? Will it help advance any of those programs? Tell us more.
So the program that's coming in for VAL201, I think we highlighted in our RNS over the first couple of years. There's a number of near-term milestones in addition to the upfront payments that we're expecting, and ongoing service consultancy agreements, so that we start getting a regular income from this. And this is really intended to cover working capital. And when I'm talking about working capital, it's not just the administrative costs, but working capital to include our budgeted evaluation agreements and taking those programs that succeed in their evaluation agreements through that preclinical development section. Now, clearly, that's quite a significant section of working capital when I start including quite a bit of R&D in it. And that is really the core of our business, is developing this in-house side. But because we're looking at expanding our capabilities by bringing in new technology platforms, we'll be able to actually bring in revenues from that side as well. So because if we can bring in a few of these technology platforms, particularly where we can bring in platforms that are already offering a service to the wider industry, they can be generating revenues, they can become integrated if we have more than one platform, which is the intention, that they can work together and to the wider industry, as well as us being able to use their technologies for an in-house pipeline.
So the TheoremRx money, it goes to underpin the new strategy, effectively.
Absolutely. So I've drifted off the original question there, haven't I? So the money coming in from Theorem will be used for working capital and those evaluation agreements, but that money will also be bolstered by money that's going to be coming in from the services that we're going to be offering from the platforms that we're hoping to identify.
So I've had a question, which is, it sounds like quite a tough question, and I suppose it's a sad one, really. Richard White has been a shareholder for a number of years. He's heard previous presentations with similar content. He's invested thousands in ValiRx in the past few years, hoping to support your kind of research, which, to be honest, does sound fantastic. But as he says, to my substantial cost. Why should I believe that this time around it'll be any better now? Richard White.
Well, I think I have to say that I've been on the board of ValiRx for approximately 18 months. Shortly before the time that I took over, the market cap of ValiRx was less than 500,000. It now stands at around 20 million, 20 to 25 million. And when you do the peer group comparison, clearly we believe that we have potential for the market cap to be significantly higher, even before any further developments or further development of capability can be carried out. So in the time that I've been on the board, I believe I've generated significant value for shareholders. Now, clearly we do sympathise with those shareholders who have held for longer and have not seen that value reflected in the share price with respect to the share price that they originally bought at. Clearly we can't change the past, and I have to emphasise that although I was CEO of the ValiSeek subsidiary, I did not have significant sway on the board of ValiRx prior to my appointment to the board 18 months ago. So
why not, Suzy? You have significant sway now. So.
I would like to make sure that the board hear you say that, but I do stress that it is not a dictatorship in ValiRx. We have a board, we have scientific advisors, we have commercial advisors, and we make sure that everything we do is well considered. We make sure everything is budgeted. We keep costs.
Let me just quickly ask you one last question. I do apologise. How do you see the preclinical pipeline developing over the next 12 months? And with the new funding coming through, are there any opportunities for early cash generation?
The opportunities for early cash generation are really around the technology platforms and the revenues that we can bring in from that.
Not about speeding up Japanese pharma company who've been 18 months and not done very much with the data studies.
I think that I'd be very surprised if any shareholders know exactly what the Japanese pharma company's done or not done, because I think
they don't know who they are, for one.
Well, that's right. Very much their choice. And likewise with the London University that doesn't want to be named, we have to respect our partners' right to confidentiality when they want it. But of course, anyone who's going to be helping us develop our programs, we are always going to respect their wishes when it comes to that. But I always stress that we are developing BAL301 in endometriosis ourselves in conjunction with looking at the data that's being generated by the Japanese pharma company.